Hello everybody and welcome to DC Fine Art. Today we're going to talk about how I varnish my oil pastel pieces. Now I decided to make this video so that way it's a little bit easier to reference in my videos, like if you're trying to look for something specifically for oil pastel varnishing, then it would be a little bit more easier than having to go through my live stream to get to the end where I varnish my oil pastel piece. So in this video, I'm basically going to cover what oil pastel varnish that I would use for what surface that I have, and also a little bit of a like do's and don'ts. There's going to be a don't. So basically do's is going to be pretty much the whole video what I do, but there is going to be a don't because I learned something, and I will end up discussing that with you right before we end up varnishing my hearts in oil pastel. So the first thing I want to talk to you is the surface. Like, what surface are you using? Are you using a paper surface such as the Sennelier oil pastel pad or the oil pastel paper by Sennelier? Are you using that type of surface? Or are you using maybe a soft pastel board for your surface for oil pastels? Maybe you decided that you're going to use a canvas. So you could use canvases, or maybe a canvas board. You know, you could use a canvas board. So it just depends on what kind of surface are you using. That's going to be key here. So let's just say I decide I am going to use the oil pastel paper by Sennelier, and I get done with my piece. What varnish am I going to use? The varnish that I have two types of varnishes. Like I said, I have the Talons varnish for oil pastels. So I do have this one here. Now, I also have the fixative oil pastel fixative by Sennelier. So same kind of brand, looks like the same type as the paper. Now I have those two. It's a spray-on varnish. So if I am doing an oil pastel on paper, then I don't really want to put the varnish right here. It's like a liquid, a really thick liquid, or not really, really thick. Shouldn't have said that. It's kind of like normal varnish. It's liquid. But if you put liquid on paper, it might end up tending, because you want to put it on nice and thick layers, it might end up bubbling your paper. So that's going to be a big, like, I don't want to risk it. I don't want to try it because I really don't want to bubble my paper. So I would not recommend, me personally, using the varnish for oil pastels by Talons on paper. Now, if you are using a pastel board, such as Apricent, if you are using that type of board, or maybe you're using a canvas board, maybe you're using a canvas, it's a much harder surface. And that I would probably go ahead and use my Talons varnish for oil pastels. But if I'm working on a paper, then I would use the fixative by Sennelier, the spray. That way it's a light spray. It's not gonna like completely get your whole paper wet. I would spray it in coats, so lightly spray it over one layer over your paper, let it dry, give it at least 30 minutes or so, maybe even an hour, but I would say about 30 minutes, and then come back again and do another light mist over it. So that way you got a second coat, and then I would probably do a third coat just because I like putting at least 3 coats on. So that's just how I am. And that's what I would use for the anything paper, like thin paper, use the spray-on varnish. So now that we covered the two fixatives or the varnishes that I have for oil pastel, I want to go over some of my don'ts, okay? So you guys ready? I hope so. So let's go ahead and turn this video around so I can show you my don'ts. All right, so as you can see, I got this pumpkin in oil pastel that I did, it was probably a little while ago whenever we were doing some fall stuff, and I ended up using some metallics, so I wasn't for sure what the Light Fast ratings were on those, or if it was Light Fast rated. I don't know. So it was basically my own personal picture that I did with oil pastels. Well, I ended up varnishing basically almost as soon as I got done. Like I may have let it dry a little bit, maybe not much time. And I remember on the live stream, since I only did a little bit of the stems, or I just did little bitty touches on it, that I went in and started varnishing it. Now, after I got through varnishing it instantly, which I wouldn't recommend you doing, I wanted to get in a varnish video, but I would probably, after I get done doing an oil pastel painting, I would probably give it a day or two. I mean, just give it time to be able to dry out if you're using OMS. So there's another thing. If you're using OMS with your oil pastel paintings, let them dry. You know, give it that day or two to completely dry before you varnish a painting. So, and the other thing is my don'ts. As soon as you get through varnishing it and you think, oh, okay, it should be done, and I'll go ahead and stick it in a frame right up against it. If it hasn't had time to cure and completely dry, it is a little bit tacky, a little sticky, but it's fine now. But let me remove this and I'll show you, because I took it out, gonna use the frame. It ended up right here. It started peeling up because it was still wet on these corners where it was a little bit thick around these edges. Not really all of the edges did it. I mean, all the sides and everything seemed to be all good, but it was like where I had maybe a little bit too much of the varnish on the painting and it needed more time to dry, and instead I popped it into a frame and then it like stuck, you know, to the frame right around this corner here. I think maybe right in there too. So it's just right around the that wasn't, but it's just right where I had a thicker layer that wasn't able to dry before I frame it. So the don'ts on this is whenever you get through varnishing it, make sure you give it at least a couple days, maybe a few days, give it like 3 days, you know, 2 or 3 days to completely dry, and then you can stick it in a frame. And it shouldn't have no problem because I restuck it in the frame and nothing else has happened to any of the corners. You can wash this, you can do whatever you want. Even though it feels a little sticky, it doesn't, there's no way of hurting it. So, and I can see that I actually had a little bit thicker here. And yeah, that's my bad. You know, I rushed through it and then I put on the varnish and went through way too quick whenever it was still not dry. So I would probably let them dry at least a few days before popping it into a frame. But other than that, since it was my own piece and I didn't know if it was live fast or not, I went ahead and just stuck it in a frame. And yeah, it's okay. I learned from this piece. I'm glad I didn't do it to any of my other pieces that I've done with oil pastels, or at least my rooster. It's been perfectly fine. And then my other ones has been perfectly fine. Okay, so let me go ahead and get this out of the way for you guys. I'll have to fit it. There we go. Yeah, just to hold it in there. I'll end up putting it back up for my fall, but that was that piece. So now we're going to get to a little bit more of a fun part. We're going to varnish this oil pastel piece. Now I'm not going to use my spray varnish. I'm actually going to use my oil pastel varnish here. Last time I had trouble getting the lid open. I actually got the lid open this time. And we'll end up using this. I don't really need that. To varnish the oil pastels, the talons. So let's go ahead and start that off. And usually I give it at least 3 coats. So I'm going to go ahead and do the first coat. We're going to let it dry. Then we're going to come back. We're going to do a second coat. We're going to let that dry. And then we'll do 3 coats. I do the same thing with my acrylic pieces when varnishing. So this one here, I'm going to do the exact same way. So I'm going to go ahead and Kind of pour this on. Oh, and by the way, if you're wanting to brush this on, I use a number 2. It's just a 2-inch Blick Essentials. So I got this from Blick, and it's a little sponge brush. Just a 2-inch one. But you can get sponge brushes anywhere. Doesn't really have to mean it has to be from Blick. It's just where I happen to get mine. So I'm going to put some on here. Just a small little drizzle. Just making sure I get all corners. Not really missing anything. Okay. Put the lid back on so no accidents. And I'm just going to be lightly doing this too. And it looks kind of milky. And that is fine. And since you're working with oil pastel too, it tends to look like it gets that kind of like a watermark to it. Like kind of like oil and water, how it doesn't really mix very well, and it kind of leaves it a little bit like streaky. Now it will do that, but the more, if you put on at least 3 coats to make sure you got it in there, you should be fine. Okay, and that's why I add at least 3 coats to it. Now I'm going to take this other side and just kind of go along. Well, I didn't really want to do that. I'm going to go along this edge right in here. Wipe up some of this excess. Okay, maybe I'll move it a little bit. Here we go. So we'll let that dry. That'll be my first coat. Of course, it's got some water looking marks in there. You can't really probably tell unless you turn it. Maybe with a glare you can kind of see it. It's like a water kind of mark where it looks like you skipped a piece, but you really didn't. That's just maybe in some of the areas it might be a little bit thicker, but it does do that. It's okay. I usually, like I said, I'll go over it at least 2 more times, and usually that fills it in. You may have a little bit of a streaking going across. I'll show you the pumpkin one more time. But you'll have, see how it's got a little bit of streaking in there when you shine it? You will have a little bit of that. But when you have it on a wall and you're looking straight at it, you can't see nothing. I mean, it's just shiny. It's only when you hold it at a certain angle, then you might see a little bit of streaks in there, but that's just from the varnish. And that does happen when you use the oil pastel varnish by Talons, but still it makes it to where, you know, it's perfectly safe. It won't get hurt. It won't get smudged. It is there. You can clean that off. I'm rubbing my finger on it. You can't hurt that unless you don't let it dry before you frame it. Then you can hurt it. So, but that's why I really like this varnish, because I definitely don't want it getting on anything. So let's go ahead and let this dry, like I said, and I'll flip it back over, or we'll go ahead and not flip it back over. We'll go ahead and add our second coats. All right, so I am back and I am ready to add my second coat. So this has been probably about an hour I let dry. And so here we go. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to kind of drizzle it, making sure I got plenty on there. Okay, so there we are. I'll put the lid back on this. And then I got my sponge brush, and it's nice and clean and dry also. So I rinsed it out with soap and water. And now I am just going to go over this nice and lightly. I'm not pushing down really hard. Making sure all these corners are coated. Usually they're the thicker parts. Making sure everything is covered. Go over that again, just make sure. Crossed. Trying to go at one angle, so that way, even if there is any lines or anything like that that show up, at least they're all going in one direction. All right. Make sure all these corners, just gonna wipe with my finger. It just seems a lot better if I wipe with my finger. Even though I kind of pushed some onto the edge here. Okay. Okay, and then there you have it. So now I'm gonna let that dry another, probably another hour, maybe another 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll do our third coat. I'll kind of shine it at an angle too with a second coat, so that way you see what it looks like with any lines or anything that shows up, and you can see that a little bit better, and then we'll go on and put our third coat down. All right, so this has been dried for, I actually let it go for a little bit over an hour. I had to do some chores, so definitely it looks shiny. It is dry. And so you can see that there's some shiny marks, like some, see those? It's like some grooves. It's got some texture to it. And I usually go across it. There we go. You can kind of see in the glare how, you see how it's got a little bit of texture, but it's still covered. So that's what that does if you look at it at an angle. Other than that, if you look at it straight on, like, you don't really see that. I mean, it's actually really shiny. And be honest, even 2 layers, you can stick with 2 layers and just leave it at that. It is completely protected right now. I mean, I can take a wash rag and clean it off. I mean, it is perfectly fine to leave it with 2 coats if you want to, or you could just put that third coat on. I usually like to put a third coat on just in case there's any areas that I have missed. So, but other than that, that's all I really do. I mean, it's about the same. That's really all I do. And to be honest with you, I mean, you could just leave it with 2 coats, but I really like adding my third coat to it. Otherwise, it feels like it's not completely done. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do this one more time. And I am going to go ahead, drizzle some of this on here. Make sure I get all corners to where I have enough on to add a nice even layer. Okay. So now that that is done, I will close that up. I will end up going over this the same exact way, no difference, just making sure that everything is covered. Just kind of spreading it out, and I'm not pushing down hard, but the same way. If there's any grooves or anything like that, going over it with the third coat, may be able to put some more in those grooves that are kind of, you know, bumpy. Like if they're really rigid, Putting a third coat on helps to fill that. And that's why I really like doing a third coat, just to make sure. But that is totally up to your discretion. If you feel like you like it with 2 coats, then you can leave it with 2 coats. I mean, it still look good with 2 coats. But I'm going to put 3 coats on to make sure I'm filling in everything at least twice. So if I missed a spot, at least I know that everything will at least have at least a minimum of 2 if I did 3 layers. And it actually looks a little bit smoother adding that third coat in. All right, so I'm gonna run my finger along there, trying to take off any excess. Here, let's run that all the way across. All right, so now we're gonna let this dry, and then I'm gonna show you, hold on, let's do this one more time. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'll show you what it looks like after it's dry with the third coat. So we'll be right back, and it should be dry. All right, so now this should be nice and dry. I've done 3 coats, and it looks like this. So you still see like those little kind of brush strokes looking, but they're not too horribly bad. There we go. Now you can really see it. So you got more of that brush stroke kind of look. And when I feel it, I do feel more of that kind of like textured, ridgy kind of feeling. But that's only if you shine it at a certain angle. But when you're looking at it without a reflection, let's just say if I turn the light to where it's not really, I mean, you can still see it. It's really shiny though, but it is definitely protected. So if you're just like wondering, basically what I do for varnishing, that's what I do. Now, if you're not wanting any of this, then I would suggest just using the Fixative by Sennelier, the spray, and that will have, it will basically not have this texture, but this here is like rocks. I mean, it is solid, it's on there, it's not going to hurt your painting, it's not going to rub off, while the other one is still, kind of looks the same, it's still stuck on there. I wish I had, let's see here, I did one with, I don't even know if it's in here, but I did one with the spray, and it was just a quick little Halloween, just kind of testing things out. But I am not for sure if I have it in here for you guys to see. I will check it out. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is with the spray fixative on paper, and it's still kind of, see how that's still kind of sticking? So this is what it looks like when you use the spray fixative, and I did one on a Halloween, like kind of like an illustration kind of thing. And you can see it still has a glossy tone to it. And it really does a nice job too of holding it on there. It still varnishes it, but that's what you get. So I really do like both, but I use the spray varnish on my paper, like products like this, so that way I still get that shine, I still get that varnish look. And then on something like this, where it's more of a board, I like to use this one here because, I don't know, I just like it. I like to have that kind of look to it, and it's really shiny. Like, this is so much more shinier. even though this does have a shine. So it still has a shine there. It's just usually not as shiny as this. So it all just depends on what you would want to do, whether or not what surface you're working on in order to create the look. That kind of hovered there. So you could do either or, but that's what the spray fixative looks like on paper. And now you know what the varnish looks like on like a pastel board, or possibly even with a canvas. I'm not for sure what it would look like on the canvas, but it would still, I mean, coat it like this, but I don't know if it might make more of the canvas kind of in and out grooves. It might have that depending on what texture canvas you have. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and subscribe for the channel. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. We'd love to have you here. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. I'll see you on the next video. Bye, you guys.